Hey, good day. Welcome back to another episode of Bible Guys with Rich and Brian. I am here in the beautiful town of Sullivan, Indiana. Rich is in the luxurious area of the world. I don't think I've ever called Oklahoma luxurious.
No, it's not luxurious.
Would you say quaint where you are? That's a word I don't say
Oh,
very often. I don't say quaint. I don't
yeah,
I don't think I've ever said the word quaint, and now I've said it 3 times, I think.
yeah, quaint may be correct, but it's hot here. I think you could say really hot Oklahoma.
Hot and steamy, luxurious
Yeah, it's going to be
suburb of Oklahoma.
105. It's going to be 105 today in beautiful Bixby, Oklahoma.
Okay. So tell the world, I'm going to assume the world is listening, since we're coming up on football season, tell the world about how good Bigsby is in high school football.
Yeah, so the Bixby Spartans have won 11 of the last 12 state championships. And if my memory serves me correctly, I think they've lost 3 games in 12 years, maybe 4 games. But I know most of the graduating classes through their entire 4 years have only lost 1 game in their tenure. Um, so my 2 oldest daughters, who both graduated from Bixby, I think they only saw 2 losses their entire time in school.
I
So it's
mean,
pretty crazy.
are they are they doing this legally? Like for real? Like how is that even possible?
Yeah, so what's happened? So Bixby is a nice suburb of Tulsa, and used to be the top suburb of Tulsa was probably Jinx. And so if you are a family who, makes a decent income and you want your kids to be in a really great school district and have all these sporting opportunities and everything, if you're a young family, you start moving to these either Owasso or Jinx or Bixby or Broken Arrow. And for a while, it was Owasso and Jinx where everybody would move. But Bixby's youth football program is so good and it's so streamlined. Like they're installing plays and packages and formations and that kind of stuff that goes all the way through high school. And so, you see, you remember seeing the little kids like at the like a gas station after football practice, and they like their helmets so big that they just tip over, and they can't support the weight of the helmet and shoulder pads. Like from that
Yeah.
age, so like by the time these kids get to ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, everything is muscle memory. Like I think there's probably 2 or 3 Division I kids on these teams usually every year, but it's not like some of these California schools or Texas schools that have 11 Division I recruits. They just they kind of play Kurt Signetti football. Like they don't make mistakes. They just run their system and their plays.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
execution
eh,
without errors.
yeah, so they're really really good.
Hmm.
I know it's not Bible guy stuff, but if you get a chance to check out Bixby High School football, you should do it.
Right on. All right.
I think one little tidbit about this. I was talking to somebody recently, and they were like, I can't remember if they were in Louisiana or Alabama. And they were like, I was at a sporting goods store, and they were selling Bixby Spartans gear there. And I'm like, as a high school, you've arrived if 3 states away, sporting goods stores are selling your gear.
Now I will say, our Dollar General here in town, they sell Sullivan High School T-shirts. So
Okay,
kind of the same level, maybe,
kind of.
but probably
Maybe we can get a one of those traveling games, and Sullivan High School can play Bixby.
that would be interesting. Um. Anyway, all right. Well, yeah, we're not here to talk about football, even though I think God invented football like as the first sport. Football's pretty
Yeah, I,
fantastic.
I think God likes football too. Like he gets out of church around the same time we do on Sundays, and then he's like, okay, church was the best part of the day, but here comes the second best part of the day, football.
Well, think about it. So God created the world in 6 days. So that's like the completion. When you're driving, down the field, a touchdown is worth 6 points. So it kind of correlates. It's like the same thing. Because like the extra point's easy. It's like a rest play, and God rested on the seventh point, seventh day, and be the seventh point. So I think that makes sense. Um, but anyway,
Yeah,
let's
for
get
sure.
into today's topic, talking about the flood. Um, I think the flood may be the most, or well, there's a lot of interesting stories. One of the most interesting, definitely top five events. And it's also one that a couple friends of mine who don't really believe, too much about the Bible. Um, the reason is they've literally said like, okay, there's no way this happened. Like, it's not possible that this event took place, and it literally makes them non-believers. Um, so go ahead and give me your overall thoughts and kind of how everything has started with this and the reason God did this, and then we'll just go through some different points of view.
Yeah. So the flood, I kind of get it, right? That it seems impossible, or if not impossible, at least highly improbable that a worldwide flood took place. The problem with not believing in it is most cultures, even non Christian cultures, believe that a worldwide flood took place. And that a lot of the things that are in the fossil record can be logically explained, not like faith-based explained, can logically be explained by a flood. Now I know non-Christian people or non-Christian scientists would say, well, this is the reason why those things are this way. But to look at it from the other point of view, you could say, okay, well, this makes sense. But I think the most intriguing part of the flood story and the thing that would make sense to most non-believers is a piece of the puzzle that often gets left out. You know, when we think about the flood, we think about it raining for 40 days and 40 nights. And because of that, the whole world is covered in water. But when the Bible talks about the flood, it talks about how the fountains of the deep are broken up. And we know from like elementary school about, Pangea, and the earth was originally one continent, one huge landmass that broke and drifted apart over years or whatever. And there's fossils of the same kind of animals on shores that would have connected, all of that kind of stuff. And when you think about that being a part of this, because I believe that is when all of this one cataclysmic event, the flood, the separation of the tectonic plates, the waters rising in between the continents, like all of that stuff happening, plus the firmament, or that protective ring around the earth that allowed people to live 900 years and things like that, all of that collapsing all at once. It wasn't really just a flood. It was a worldwide catastrophic event that, when you put it in that context, like pretty much all belief systems believe in a worldwide catastrophic event. They just believe that the aftermath was what brought it on was different and the aftermath was different. But that singularity of a worldwide catastrophic event is believed kind of universally. So when you look at the flood through that lens, and not just one guy on a hill building a boat, putting some animals in it, it raining really hard, and then the whole world flooding, like, I don't think that's what the Bible is conveying there. It is, yeah, water was involved, rain was involved, but it was a worldwide cataclysmic event.
Hmm. And wasn't it like it wasn't just rain falling? Wasn't it like water coming up from the ground also?
Yeah, that's what I like when the continents broke apart, I believe there was, all of that. Think about one big continent surrounded by water like like a ginormous island, and then everything shatters into seven pieces, and really more than that, because there's, islands and different things or whatever, but it shatters and breaks apart into all these ways. It would have been so violent that much of this stuff would have run up on land. Like, it wasn't, yeah, just rainwater. It was water coming up from below, and really covering everything and then subsiding. Like, almost like when you see a wave crash onto the shore, like a giant wave, and then you watch it roll back, and then it takes, minutes or whatever for everything to dry back out. or like if it's a tsunami, it takes days or sometimes weeks for everything to come back into place. So I think imagine a worldwide, enormous, broke up Pangea getting hit by tsunami, because the only thing that would break that up in that way are massive earthquakes across the globe. That's what I think, the fountains of the deep were broken up. That's what I believe it means, was everything was broke apart by these massive tectonic shifts, and then tsunamis were sent all over the available landscape. And we know right now that an earthquake big enough in the ocean can send a tsunami to the shore that can go up, huge distances and destroy everything and take a long time for things to come back to normal. So if you think of the flood in that way, then it makes a lot more sense to me. And again, we've mentioned this several times. We don't know everything. We're just normal guys talking about the Bible in the way that it makes sense to us. And I'm sure there's lots of scholars who would pop on here and say you're an idiot. But I've been told I'm an idiot so many times in my life that doesn't even bother me anymore.
So, okay, so if we set the stage from all, from the beginning of this, God basically just gives Noah instructions. Here's, here's the specs of the boat. Gopher wood, is that what it was? You're on mute.
Yeah, I don't think anybody really knows what, I mean, there is nothing right now that we call gopher wood. And so I think it's probably like a regional term. Um, so I have no idea um, what it means. I actually looked into that a little bit before this episode, and really there's no real consensus, I don't think, on what gopher wood is. I do think the interesting thing is it says it was pitched within and without. And so clearly, whatever this wood was had to be doctored pretty heavily to get to that place, to be seaworthy.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I'm not sure what gopher wood is.
Yeah. So, and it took him, I forget how old Noah was at that time, but it was basically it was 100 years, right? I think it was 100 years for him to build this. Like that's
Yeah,
just that's
also
crazy.
yeah, conflicting opinions on how long it was. It was 50 or 60 years, 100 years. And this is where I think some people, when they're discussing stuff in the Bible, are like, you know, use these little things that don't really matter to be like, oh, well, this can't have happened or this is wrong or what. Like, it was a long time. And I think that's again, Moses is giving us this information thousands of years after it happened. And so he's putting it into perspective in the best way he can. Uh, it was a very long time. I can't remember if Moses was 40 or 60 when he started building the ark, which I'm 48. And I couldn't build a boat out of popsicle sticks at this point in my life. My shoulders hurt, my knees hurt, everything else hurts. So Noah just getting out there and hoofing it for, 60 to 100 years and building this massive, 400-foot long boat is pretty remarkable in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, a paper airplane, I can somewhat, get it to fly maybe like 12 feet. That's probably anything with any sort of like movement, like that's probably my max would be like a paper airplane. So yeah, that's pretty impressive to be able to do that. Um, so on the boat, it was Noah and his family. So you got, three sons and then three wives and then Noah and his wife, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I've always found that strange, like, cause back then you would think like, because they live so long that they have just a lot of kids, but for them to only have three, I always found that, uh, and again, there's obviously other context, there's other things that happen that we just don't know, but I always found that kind of odd that there were only three, just because how long people lived and how many children a lot of people in the Bible had back then. Um, so yeah, so you got the family set if we're, fast forwarding 50, 60, 100 years, however long it was. And then we move into animals. So that I think this is the not only is the boat, building that just insane, but you're collecting the animals two by two. And when I say collecting, I guess it's more like God commanding them, or I don't know exactly how that worked. I don't think Noah had to like wake up and like, all right, I gotta go grab a couple kangaroo today and make sure we got a female and a male. I think it was just instinctively driven into the minds of these animals. I'm guessing. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I mean, we know that animals can do this, right? Based on like
Like
migratory
migration?
patterns and
Yeah.
yeah, and hibernation patterns and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that again, you're talking about a miracle. So people are like, well, this couldn't have happened because it's too like impossible. But what the Bible is saying here is this is miraculously done. Like any other solution to try to reason this out is not feasible because you're wanting a natural answer to a problem that takes a supernatural answer. And so anytime you try to take God out of the equation and the stuff that happened in the Bible, a lot of it doesn't work because we believe in a supernatural God. We believe God supernaturally created the world. We believe all sorts of supernatural things happened throughout history.
Right. No, you're right. So
Right. No, you're
let's
right.
kind of picture like what if you were actually on like you're let's say you're one of Noah's sons. You're there. Um what do you think the worst thing was it basically it was about a year? Were they on there for close to a year?
Yeah, I think so.
So what do you think the absolute worst part of that year would be if you were
Oh, it's
one?
got to be. I mean, you would think it's the smell, right? Like I would think that's got to be the worst thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think that's probably right. I mean, because not only is it the animals, but I mean, it's all the people too. So you got eight humans. Um, could they bathe? Think about
Yeah.
that. How did they eat? How did they cook? You know, have a fire going and big a big boat made of wood, and you got like an open fire. Like that sounds a little dangerous. Um, so things like that are kind of crazy to think about. I doubt they had DoorDash then. I doubt a dove just like dropped a box of hot pockets ready to go. Through the window of the ark. So things like that. My crazy mind just goes to those places and things like what was that like? How would they have even dealt with that? So what are your thoughts on little things like that? Whether it's bathing, eating, sleeping, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. The 7 pairs of clean animals probably solves the food problem, I think. Um, the reason that they brought more clean than unclean, I think, is not just for repopulation purposes, but probably for food purposes. Um, I also think that everything that was brought on the ark, it makes sense, right? If it was all juvenile, like it doesn't make sense to bring. First of all, from a size standpoint, from a feeding standpoint, like all of that kind of stuff, that it was probably didn't make sense to bring full adult animals on because they don't have as long a life cycle after they're off the ark. So it seems feasible to me that they probably brought juvenile animals, things that even could have some of them reproduced in that year time on the ark. Um, the other answer to that is again, this is a supernatural event that God created. Maybe everything was supernaturally sustained. We have biblical reference to God doing that multiple times in the Old Testament, where He supernaturally provided water, He supernaturally provided food. So that could have been part of the details that just weren't so important that Moses included them in the writing. But either way, I think there was plenty of food around. Um, I mean, yeah, I think that the sanitary part of the living conditions were going to be horrible. Like bathing, I don't think there's a way to jump. Like you'd say, well, they're surrounded by water, so surely they could bathe. But I don't think that probably from the way the ark was constructed was possible. So
Yeah, they probably didn't have
I,
like floats where they could just like, air up a raft or something and then just kind of hang out, for the day to get some water and
but
kind of.
you would think for that first 40 days, right, where it's just raining cats and dogs, you wouldn't need, you could just go out onto the deck for a little while and bathe. Um, so, and maybe fresh water. So, yeah, there's a lot of logistical issues where people are like, well, that just wouldn't happen because it's too hard to logistically pull off. Well, that is true. I mean, we've put people in space and we've done a lot of other things just with man-made capabilities that would have seemed impossible to pull off at different times in history. But when you look at this as okay, I'm a person of faith. I accept that God does miraculous things. This flood was part of that. I think it makes more sense than people think, just on its face. When at first blush, when you listen to it, and you're like, okay, are his sons like animal wranglers? Are they like Steve Irwin out there collecting? So there's some of that you're like, okay, this had to be miraculous for it to happen. And I think the sustenance on the ark, the food, the sanitary conditions, all that kind of stuff, there could have been some miraculous ways that was handled.
Hmm. Okay. Um, so let's kind of finish up here going, after the ark, when, or after the flood, I should say, when the waters are subsiding, the rainbow and the dove, things are coming down. And like, it's another thing to think about. So I mentioned like, what would your thoughts be? Um, just like, what would be your worst experience being inside it? But also think about, okay, let's fast forward a year, whatever, and the land is dry and you have this enormous planet and you're one of the 8 people. So now there's 8 billion. Uh, then there was 8. It's you, mom and dad, couple brothers, 3 wives. Um, that's pretty wild to think about. To think like, and I know you could go back to say, well, it happened. It was just Adam and Eve, and then look what happened. But this is like, okay, there's 8 people. We've had a whole civilization for however many years before the flood. I don't know the exact number. I don't think anybody knows the exact number. But now it's a clean reset, and there are 8 people to basically get this thing going again. Um, One thing I think about, and you probably have an answer for this, I'm assuming. I've never understood the different racial makeup of how we get in. If you assume that most people in that time, because the Bible is basically centered in Israel, in the Middle East. Um, People from Israel, most of them have a certain look, um, but they don't look like a lot of people in the world. So how does that all happen if there's 8 of them and they all pretty much look like, people from Israel? How do we get the different makeup of the different races that come from that if they all started from the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, so as they step off the ark, one of the things I think is interesting is Adam and Eve, yes, started society from a, uh, started from scratch, but they also didn't have anything to remember. So Moses' family, that's funny. Noah's family, when they got off the ark, they were starting over from scratch, but also like they were experiencing loss because they had a functioning society. We don't know to what degree, but we can assume it was pretty advanced in the fact that like society had gotten really bad. And so it had to be advanced far enough to where some of these things that we know would have derailed society had come into play. And so I think society was likely, fairly advanced at that point. It's not like they were Stone Age people, and they were knocked back generations in the amount of technology because they were essentially hunter gatherers again, and probably didn't have a ton of experience in that realm. So the generations following Noah had to learn to be, hunters and farmers and builders and all of those things again. And the Bible talks, we're moving on towards the Tower of Babel and Nimrod, and then we may do a whole episode on that at some point. So I don't want to get too deep into it. But what we know happened there is when God scattered the languages, he likely created all these small feudal states or nation states of people that you can only, so if you imagine like thousands or hundreds of thousands even of people, and all of a sudden they speak all these different languages where God confuses their languages, and that then translates into, okay, well, I'm listening to all these people talk and I understand what these people over here are saying. So you can imagine that they congregated in these, geographic regions with people who spoke the same language as them. But just like everything in all of history, some tribe over here, they just happen to congregate in a really great spot for, hunter gathering, agriculture, farming, building, whatever. And then this group over here who spoke a different language, they congregated in a spot that wasn't as ideal. And so again, just from what Bible Guides tries to do is just from a common sense standpoint, I can assume that this group over here, they decided to try to take out, the people who are. So what that would have done was geographically push people further and further apart to where you started settling these different locations on this, Eurasian and African continents, where you could connect things by land or short boat trips. And so things started pushing further and further away. And when you did that, you have groups of people who just out of preference started, selecting mates based on character traits, physical character traits that they found to be the most attractive in that small group. And then that relationship building throughout time in different geographic regions focused on those particular character traits. So that's how, in my mind, you would have gotten different languages, different nations, different sets of physical character traits that differentiate throughout the world. And there were probably already some differentiations inside of creation, that were just there because God put them there. And so I think after the ark, those are probably the two most interesting things, is that building over didn't just mean starting from exactly where they were before the flood. They were knocked back like a really long way. They were probably fairly advanced, and they had to learn to, like, imagine life without the wheel. And a wheel is not necessarily an easy, I mean, I guess you can find a stump and, a tree and cut it down and cut it into wheels or what. But like as history moves on, like wheelwrights and the creation of that, like their society before the flood likely had all of that stuff. But then how do you do mass market farming and agriculture and even large hunting and gathering? The first thing you got to do is like create some of these basic necessities that you have, that you probably took for granted before the flood. So I
Right.
think that's really interesting. And obviously, like from a fiction standpoint, man, you could dive into so many cool things from there. But then after they get over that initial jump into all of that stuff, then yeah, you have the kind of the splitting up of communities and moving further and further apart from each other until you have, Far East Asia settled by an entirely different group of people, far South Africa, all of those places eventually get settled. And what does that really look like? Because I'm just speculating. And again, I'm an idiot half the time. So the things I think may be wrong. But in my, tiny brain, that's the thing that makes the most sense.
Yeah. One other thing, you mentioned agriculture. So, we didn't touch on this, but not only was it gathering animals, but didn't it also mention like gathering like seeds? Um, I thought that was that in the Bible too, or was it just animals?
I don't remember that. I'm not saying that it's not in there. It certainly could be something that I've forgotten, but that would make sense, right? That like um, the other thing you would think is if all of these big cataclysmic things happened and a bunch of plant life was just absolutely decimated, but it was seed bearing and it left it into the ground, like you would think that pretty quickly after the flood, things would have just voluntarily started growing back because all of this dead vegetation actually created an
Mhm.
ideal climate for stuff to regrow.
Right. And was it Mount Ariat where supposedly the ark landed?
Yeah, Ararat, Mount
Ararat.
Ararat, and I think there is all kinds of you see on like the homepage of your internet like the Ark discovered or what. I think there is a lot of pretty good uh historical information on where that would be, and I think there are people who claim that there have been discoveries that would prove this. I am not an expert in archaeology or that kind of thing. And there's so many claims on the internet that I tend to just ignore those. So I don't know much about what would have become of the ark after, what's in the Bible. It's
Yeah.
just hard to know what's true and what's not true.
Yeah. No, for sure. So, well, we will close on that. We could obviously talk, a lot about this and go deeper, but we'll keep we try to keep this around 30 minutes. So, thanks for listening. Please do share, like, let people know. Our goal is to have as much information out there to pique some curiosity, and we want you guys to actually dive into it yourself and read the Bible. That's the only way you can grow and learn, as a believer, as a Christian. So we strongly recommend checking this out for yourself and come up with your own conclusions. So anyway, thank you guys for listening so much to the Bible Guys with Rich and Brian. We hope you have a blessed day, and we are out.